now, who is the face of the GOP? Is it Mama Grizzly and her Tea Partying friends, or is it someone else entirely? And how will the GOP deal with the identity crisis of sorts? And next, how will the next Pope fare as the head of the Catholic Church here? It is a church at the crossroads. We'll have my interview today with Cardinal Egan, a man who knows the Pope for years. And later, stop and frisk on trial. Will the judge put the brakes on the NYPD's controversial policing policies? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks a lot for joining us. It's Monday evening, March 18th. And let's start with a little politics and with a question that we often find ourselves asking here on this program. What is the future of the Republican Party, and how will the party have to change if it's going to win wider national appeal? Well, there was certainly little call for change if you watch this weekend CPAC, which is a conservative convention outside of D.C., where the usual suspects were up to, in many cases, their usual attacks.
Mr. President, we admit it. You won. Accept it. Now step away from the teleprompter and do your job. More background checks? Dandy idea, Mr. President. Should have started with yours. We're not here to put a fresh coat of rhetorical paint on our party. We're not here to abandon our principles in a contest of government giveaways. That's a game we will never, ever win.
Notice the big gulp. All right, a new study out, though, is commissioned, in fact, by the Republican National Committee themselves. Okay, so this study from Republicans themselves, and it seems to suggest that the party does need to turn away from the Sarah Palins if they want to get back in the White House. And also, they need to find new people with new messages. Or does it? We're going to have more now from our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman. And Andrew, we started talking about this on Friday when this thing kicked off. And if anything, this weekend, some of the messaging got doubled down.
Well, and there was talk that CPAC was going to focus on the future of the party. And instead, there was a little bit of a greatest hits there. If you were hoping for change you could believe in at CPAC, you were probably disappointed by the conservative conclave. Rand Paul won the CPAC straw poll. And considering the attention-getting slot they gave Mitt Romney, you would think not all that much had changed within the party. But following Romney's loss in November, RNC Chairman Reince Priebus put together a study, more like a 2012 autopsy, to carve out a path for the GOP to get its mojo back on the national stage. Its conclusions? That the GOP needs to better connect with minority, female, and young voters. The report also outlines how the party can do that by supporting immigration reform, by focusing on the fiscal needs of the middle class, and by changing the presidential primary process, cutting the number of debates, arranging primaries in regional clusters, and by catering the primary process to assist candidates with, in its words, deep pockets. In 2012 speak, that would make Mitt Romney's path to the nomination easier than it would be for the Rick Santorums or the Newt Gingriches of the party. This in a party that Chairman Priebus has himself described, voters most often as scary, narrow-minded, and out of touch, as well as a party of stuffy old men. But what exactly is that report seeking to do? Help the GOP find policies that will attract more of the voters it turned off in 2012? Or just help the GOP sell its current policies better? I asked that question earlier to the communications director for the Republican National Committee. Is the sense from the party as a result of this report that, hey, the results of the 2012 election might have been different if we had just sold our policies differently? It's not the policy, it's the outreach, it's how we sold it, it's how we marketed it?
Well, again, I would say that the policies that we have are sound, but I think the way we sold them, some of the missteps that we had, some of the lack of outreach.
But the GOP might be wise to consider alternate policies and not just alternate sales methods. More people in a poll conducted for House Majority Leader Eric Cantor say the economy and jobs are at their top issue, not the debt and deficit, which is where much of the GOP's fiscal focus has been since Election Day. When asked how D.C. should cut the government, voters overwhelmingly say they prefer a mix of spending cuts and new revenues, the Democratic approach, versus just spending cuts, that, of course, the GOP approach. But asked whether they wanted to cut specific programs, a majority of voters say they want spending increases or at least to keep spending steady in these 18 areas, ranging from veterans to Social Security to Medicare, roads and infrastructure, and even more, all areas that Republicans in Congress have in their budget, budget proposal slated for cuts.
All right, let's bring in our table on this, Andrew. Thank you. Richard Brodsky, former New York Assemblyman, senior fellow at Demos and professor at NYU. Dominic Carter, political journalist, author. And we're joined tonight by Warren Adler, author, political strategist, and former advisor to President Nixon. And I'm curious, your old boss, could he get elected as a Republican candidate with his positions today?
Probably not. I don't think so. I think he's considered a liberal by the Republican establishment. But I think he was a great president who did a stupid thing, like many of our presidents. I think he was highly qualified, which we don't have today, highly qualified people, in my own view. I'm a novelist primarily, so I could be politically incorrect. I think we have a bunch of amateurs running the country today, including the president, and we're in trouble. We are spending ourselves to death, and sooner or later we're going to wind up like Cyprus or Greece, and that's the bottom line. If we don't realize that, we're in trouble.
We're going from the question of CPAC now to the whole question of Washington, and if I could stay with CPAC for a second, Dominic, I close my eyes. I swear these guys, it's like November never happened.
It's a joke. The entire CPAC event is a joke. And for Democrats, if you want to keep losing, keep doing these events.
They were doing fine. I don't know why you people are criticizing them. That's a brilliant set of ideas out there.
Two things I want to say. One, I have seen it all tonight. I mean, I really have seen it all tonight. I always thought with Governor Palin that she was a great role model because she proved that anyone can succeed in our great country, no matter what. But I have seen it all tonight. Governor Palin advising the President of the United States to back off of a teleprompter. I have seen it all. But I do want to ask a quick follow-up. You said you believe that the President, I agree with your first part of your assessment, a bunch of amateurs. But what makes President Obama an amateur?
He was an amateur. What was his background?
U.S. Senate, Harvard University.
He has now 4 years of experience. What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. He had no experience as an executive. And as a result, we've had 4 years of overspending, and we're in trouble. One thing about Obama, though, I'll tell you what he is.
But doesn't that go back to President Bush?
Let me explain what Obama is from my point of view, and I can be politically incorrect because I'm not in the ball game. I'm an observer. He has a few things going for him. He is good looking. He has the greatest smile I've ever seen of anyone. He has tremendous charm, and he is a great speaker. But he's an incompetent executive, and that's the way it is. I'm sorry to say that. I know I'm politically incorrect in this group here.
Well, I mean, as to the personal attributes of George Bush or Richard Nixon or Obama, let me just say that this is, in the end, American politics are about ideas. And the Republican Party, to circle around and say, as the director of the communications said, it's just we didn't sell it right. They're selling ideas that the American people will reject on personal freedom, on things like sexual orientation, on abortion, on race relations, on class issues. They are the solid supporters of the wealthiest 1%. You come to the American people dressed as Madonna with those set of ideas, and you're not going to do very well. So I don't think.
You might be about 20 years late on that
Andrew,
reference.
I think it's more serious than this because who won the straw poll? We didn't even mention the name Rand Paul. And to me, before people say, oh, it's CPAC, well, historically, CPAC matters. If you're going to get the Republican nomination, you got to place pretty good in this thing or win, and it tends to have, and who is Rand Paul? Rand Paul wants to roll back the Civil Rights Amendments. I mean, the idea that Rand Paul is your party standard bearer to a certain degree or to a certain population shows me that these guys, for all of that autopsy, which made some sense, they don't get it.
I think Rand Paul winning the straw poll was maybe a reflection of the flavor of the month-itis that we saw during the Republican primaries in the run-up to 2012. Rand Paul had the latest moment for the GOP.
They like that stuff.
The filibuster in the Senate sort of put him at the top of people's minds. As for the interview that I did with Sean Spicer, the communications director for the RNC, they went on about 12 minutes because I really was shocked that the conclusion of this report was not we need to consider other policy prescriptions, but rather we just need to sell it better. We need to figure out a way to do it.
Richard Nixon was never constrained by ideology. He was for price controls. He created EPA. He understood that if you're going to govern, you can't govern from the wacky right. These guys haven't reached that conclusion, and they are going to suffer the fate of everybody in the United States who's trying to govern from an extreme.
Well,
they won't win.
And ironically, President Nixon would fare a lot better today in the general election than he would in the primary. I don't think there's no way he could get through a Republican primary.
You know what you fellows forget is that 29 states have Republican governors. That is the majority of states in this country. So the Republican Party that you see on CPAC does not reflect the entire United States. It's a section of the Republican Party.
29 governors is a function of the 2010 election, and it won't last if they act out.
Some of it is because they did very well in the 2010 gubernatorial cycle, but it's also there's been a greater focus by Republicans and by conservatives on the state level.
We've had on that same seat here Republicans very recently from Congress who've all said Ronald Reagan's Big Tent party, you can't get through a primary anymore. You can't be a pro-choice Republican and win. It doesn't matter even if you're in the Northeast. Ask Chris Shays. I mean, the guys will tell you that the amount of litmus tests you have to go through, even if you disagree, maybe agree in the main but disagree in the margin, you can't get through anymore. And it's a different party. I mean, Jacob Javits of the world. Could you imagine him even having a chance in a primary, forget about even getting to a general? It's a different Republican Party than the one I think you grew up in and certainly worked in. And I think that is the big difference here right now. And I think CPAC, and I know it's a conservative PAC, but still, I think it reflects the biggest challenge Republicans have is they can't look at an election and say we really do have to change. And to me, I don't see how they get past that if they want to win an election again, at least a national one.
They will. They will. These things, I've been around a long time. They swing one way and the other way. And it has, what you were looking at is a snapshot of time. At this point, the National Republican Party, being a loser, has to figure out a way out of the swamp they're in. But sooner or later they will. And sooner or later, the Democrats will falter. Yep. They're not going to be the party of the future forever. And as soon as we finally discover that we're overspending, and that we just can't afford to live the way we're living, it will all change.
But Richard, you can't, I know you got to take a break, but you can't just keep saying cut, cut, cut with no agenda. The Republican Party offers nothing. And to the middle class, forget it.
And to your point, Dominic, Andrew went down a list. 18 of the programs here. The majority, 3/5 or 3/4 of the public doesn't want to see them cut. And I agree with you. We got to tighten our belt in some ways here. But the idea of at least what was sold this weekend in Washington for the strategy for it, I don't think the public's buying. All right, we take a quick break. When we come back, I sat down earlier today with Cardinal Egan. He's going to tell us how he thinks the new Pope will lead this church here. We'll have that conversation after this.